There are stories in the Bible that seem written to reveal the human heart just as it is, full of dreams, failures, passions, and consequences. Among them all, Jacob's story stands out for its intensity. He desired the blessing longed for, the future, but decided to obtain it in a way that left deep scars. And it was precisely this deception that launched him into a journey of tears, love, and trials. Jacob's flight was not just a hurried departure from home, but the beginning of a lonely road. Each step carried the memory of his mistake and a fear of the brother who had sworn to kill him. An unexpected surprise changed everything, an encounter capable of rekindling hope in a weary heart. Sometimes, just one look is enough to give life new meaning. That's what happened with Jacob when his eyes met those of a young woman tending the flock. His heart raced in a way that not even years of waiting could erase. Love was born like a flame on a cold night, bringing strength to endure the impossible. But whoever carries the mark of deception in the past is sooner or later tested by the same weight. Jacob would discover this in the most painful way. What seemed like the beginning of a romantic dream soon turned into a disappointment that would change his life forever. This is not just a love story, but one of justice, of waiting, and of choices that bring consequences. The deceiver would be deceived. Passion would face obstacles. And what seemed like a night of joy would become a drama capable of shaking hearts. But what would happen next? That is what we are about to discover. Hello, what a joy to have you here once again. Today we are going to dive into one of the most emotional stories in the Bible, a story filled with love, deception, pain, and hope. A narrative that shows how our choices can bring unexpected consequences, but also how God never stops guiding the lives of those who trust in Him. Jacob always longed for the blessing of the firstborn. In his heart, he was certain that God had chosen him. But instead of waiting for the Lord's timing, he decided to take what he wanted with his own hands. With the help of his mother, Rebekah, he deceived his elderly and blind father, pretending to be his brother Esau. He obtained what he most desired, the blessing spoken over his life. But that triumph came with a bitter price. Esau, consumed with rage, swore to kill him. And Jacob, the beloved son of Rebekah, was forced to flee in haste, leaving behind his family, his homeland, and everything familiar to him. What he did not realize was that this farewell would also be the last time he would ever see his mother. The woman who had helped him in his deception would pay the price of separation, and their home would never be the same again. Now on the road to exile, Jacob carried not only the blessing, but also the memory of his mistake. Between the promise of a glorious future and the weight of his failures, he journeyed toward a new land, without knowing that there he would face encounters that would change the course of his life forever. But how would God deal with a young deceiver fleeing the consequences of his actions? And what surprises awaited him in a distant land where love and disappointment would become intertwined? Stay with us, because the first chapter of this journey will reveal an unexpected beginning to the greatest love story of Jacob's life. The shadow of deception still weighed heavily on Jacob's heart, but the way he had secured that blessing was etched into his conscience like a wound that would not heal. The disguise of Esau, the goatskins wrapped around his arms, the forced voice before his blind father. It all felt like a cruel theater. When he heard Isaac pronounce words of blessing, his heart pounded, but along with the joy came the bitter taste of deceit. The triumph was short-lived. Esau, burning with fury, swore to kill him. The house, once a place of safety, had become a trap. And Rebekah, the mother who had supported his plan, was forced to advise him to flee. The pain was even deeper because Jacob did not know that this would be his last glance at his beloved mother. Rebekah would never again see the son she had so tenderly protected. The blessing, seized in haste, now cost him the distance from his family, the weight of loneliness, and the ache of endless longing. As Jacob walked, his eyes burned with tears. Each step pulled him farther from home, and every memory struck his heart like a blow. The face of his deceived father, the rage of his betrayed brother, the embrace of his mother lost forever. The road became a valley of regret. Yet the promise of God still echoed in his mind. Could the Lord truly fulfill his plan through someone who had used deception to gain it? The desert offered no answers. Jacob looked for a stone on which to rest, and his sleep was light, disturbed by memories. He felt small before the greatness of the promise and unworthy of God's favor. Still, in prayer, he begged the Lord not to abandon him. With every mile, his hope mingled with fear. Exile was not just an escape. It was a new beginning in an unfamiliar land. There, far from everything he knew, he would have to learn to wait, to trust, and to recognize that the Lord always fulfills his promises. Even when man fails, after days of travel, his weary feet led him to a well. As he approached, he saw shepherds waiting to water their flocks. The scene seemed ordinary, but for Jacob, it would be the turning point of his story. Then his eyes fixed on a young woman leading the sheep with firmness and grace. It was Rachel. Her beauty seemed to shine brighter than the sun, and her gentleness captivated him. Jacob's heart raced so intensely that even the burden of his flight felt lighter. For the first time since leaving his father's house, he felt a breath of hope. This young woman not only caught his attention, but ignited within him a spark of new life. Jacob approached, and the moment was filled with emotion. He, who had come from a lonely journey, now found someone who seemed to carry with her the fragrance of promise. Amid the well, the sheep, and the heat of the day, something happened in his heart. Love was born, but Jacob did not yet know what awaited him. He could not imagine that this newfound love would also become the field of his greatest trials. Between promises of labor, future deceptions, and years of waiting, his life would become deeply entwined with that of the young woman. The fugitive had found love, but love would come with pain, patience, and profound lessons. What seemed like a casual meeting by a well would, in truth, be the beginning of one of the most intense stories in the Bible. A story where the deceiver would come to know the weight of being deceived. Jacob's first encounter with Rachel left a deep mark on the heart of the young fugitive. Until then, his days had been filled with uncertainty, overshadowed by the fear of his brother and the longing for home. But when he saw the young woman, with gentle yet determined eyes, guiding the flock with skill, something inside him was set ablaze. Rachel was not only beautiful, there was a grace about her that seemed to bring hope to Jacob's weary soul. The well that had quenched the thirst of many travelers became the stage of a love that time itself would not be able to erase. A few days later, Judah met Laban, his maternal uncle and Rachel's father. He was received with joy, like a long-lost relative returning to the family fold. Yet, the initial celebration soon gave way to negotiations. Laban was not a man of gratuitous gestures. Every opportunity was an opening for advantage. When he noticed his nephew's interest in his younger daughter, he saw a chance to profit. Jacob did not hesitate. With courage and passion, he made a bold proposal. "I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter." Laban accepted without resistance, perhaps even surprised by the intensity of that love. But for Jacob, the agreement was no burden. His heart was so full of hope that 7 years seemed only a small price to pay. Thus began a season of hard labor. Jacob tended Laban's flocks under the scorching sun, endured cold nights, and cared for every detail as if the animals were his own. Yet, instead of weighing down his soul, the toil was transformed into joy by the constant thought of Rachel. Each day that ended was one day less of waiting, and each task completed was a silent gift offered to the woman his heart adored. The seasons passed. Spring brought life to the fields. Summer displayed the abundance of the pastures. Autumn cooled the air, and winter hardened the soil. Through them all, Jacob's love never faded. Whenever he looked at Rachel, he felt every sacrifice was worthwhile. Seeing her renewed his strength, and even the hardest labor became light. The Bible summarizes this time with a phrase full of poetry. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Time, which so often weighs heavily on human shoulders, became a gentle breeze for the one who truly loved. The clock seemed to quicken, and with each passing year, Jacob drew closer to the dream of finally calling Rachel his wife. But not everything was simple. Laban's watchful eyes followed his nephew's every move. He saw the devotion, he perceived the passion, and, in silence, he plotted his own schemes. He knew that according to local custom, the older daughter should be married before the younger. Leah, Rachel's sister, lived perpetually in her shadow. Her eyes were tender, but her quiet presence did not draw the attention Rachel so easily commanded. Laban feared his elder daughter might be left behind, and in his mind, a plan was already taking shape, a plan that would forever alter the course of this family. Jacob, deeply in love, suspected nothing. To him, every glance shared with Rachel was a promise of the future. Every word between them, a hope that soon their love would be fulfilled. On starry nights, he might even dream of the life they would share. Children running across the fields. A simple home filled with love, and the peace of living beside the woman his heart had chosen, and time truly flew. The 7 years passed. Like a breath, Jacob's heart swelled with anticipation. At last, the long-waited moment had arrived. The wedding was prepared, the feast arranged, and joy filled the house. The groom was ready to receive his beloved and seal, with a kiss and an embrace. The love that had carried him through years of waiting. But Jacob had no idea that behind the curtains of celebration, another plan was unfolding. Laban, with shrewdness, was preparing a deception Jacob could never have imagined. The same young man who, years earlier, had used trickery to steal a blessing, was now about to taste the bitter cup of being deceived. The day ended in festivity, and the night promised to be filled with celebration and tenderness. Jacob believed. He was on the verge of living the beginning of his happiness. Yet destiny held a bitter surprise, one that would turn tears of joy into tears of sorrow. But what really happened that night? How could a love so pure transform into a disappointment so painful? That answer will be revealed in the next chapter. The wedding feast had been prepared with great joy. The aroma of spices filled the air. Guests sang and danced, and Jacob's heart throbbed with the expectation of the long-dreamed moment. For 7 long years, he had served patiently each day, sustained by his love for Rachel. Now At last, he believed the time had come to call that young woman his wife. Laban, with his sly smile, watched everything closely. He did not ignore the intensity of Jacob's love for Rachel, but neither did he overlook the customs and, above all, his own convenience. In his mind, a plan had solidified. Instead of giving the younger daughter, he would give the elder, Leah. Quiet carried in her eyes a gentle look, but her heart bore the weight of living in her sister's shadow. For the father, there was no problem in switching roles. Night fell. Jacob, filled with wine and the euphoria of celebration, was led to the tent. The veil covering the bride's face was thick, hiding her features. The darkness of the chamber and the ardent anticipation in Jacob's heart prevented him from perceiving the deception. To him, it was Rachel who was there. His heart surrendered to the certainty that he was living the fulfillment of a dream guarded for years. But dawn brought with it the bitter truth. As he awoke, Jacob turned to the woman beside him and, with a jolt, saw not Rachel's delicate face, but Leah's timid gaze. His heart froze. Joy turned to shock, tenderness to sorrow, and the promise of happiness to bitterness stunned. Jacob rushed from the tent and went straight to Laban. Rage burned within him. "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" His words cut through the morning silence like blades. But Laban replied with the calculated calm of one who had expected such a reaction. "It is not done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill this one's bridal week, and we will also give you the other. For the service you will render me yet another 7 years." The word struck Jacob like poison. In that instant, he realized that the deception he had practiced against his brother had now come upon him. Years earlier, he had clothed himself as Esau to seize Isaac's blessing. Laban had given him Leah in place of Rachel. The deceiver had been deceived. The law of sowing and reaping unfolded before his very eyes, and the weight of the lesson pressed upon his heart. The dilemma was terrible. His love for Rachel still burned, fierce as fire. But now Leah, the elder sister, was his wife by right. He had not desired this, had not chosen this path, yet he had to face the consequences. Joy had turned to conflict, and his life had become a stage of family tensions that would echo for years. Leah, in turn, lived through a storm of emotions, always overshadowed by her sister's beauty. She now found herself as Jacob's wife. Yet she knew, deep in her soul, that his heart belonged to Rachel. What should have been a home of love became a field of silent disputes. The position she now held did not bring her full happiness. but only the burden of carrying the fruit of deception. Jacob, nevertheless, chose to accept Laban's new agreement. For the love of Rachel, he committed himself to work another 7 years. The weight, though bitter, seemed light in the face of the promise of finally being with the woman he had chosen from the beginning. This episode marked Jacob's life deeply. The memory of that bitter morning would never be forgotten. He, who had left his land as a fugitive because of a deception, now discovered that the same sin had reached him. The pain of being deceived taught him that the paths of lies and cunning always bring consequences, and that only fidelity to God could lead to true blessing. Still, even amid tears and disappointment, the Lord continued to guide his life. The divine plan was not undone because of human failings. God would transform even the fruit of deception into part of his promise. For from the wombs of Leah and Rachel would come the sons who would form the tribes of Israel. At that moment, Jacob could not comprehend the full scope of the story being written. To him, there was only pain, confusion, and the weight of the past reflected in the present. But God saw ahead. The Lord knew that from that troubled household would arise a people, and that from Judah, Leah's son, would come the lineage of the Messiah. But for now, Jacob's life was marked by tears and the burden of disappointment. His love for Rachel still pulsed strongly, and he was willing to endure another 7 years of waiting. What seemed impossible to many felt light to him, 'cause love always finds strength where logic cannot dot. And so, amid the shock of deception and the weight of discovery, a new chapter began. The rivalry between the two sisters would open an even more intense story, filled with tears, jealousy, and fragile hopes. Life in Jacob's household was never the same after that night of deception. He had served 7 years, filled with hope and love, believing Rachel would be his only wife. But now he faced a complex reality. 2 women, 2 sisters, sharing the same home. Leah, given in marriage by force, bore the mark of being the unwanted wife. Rachel, the one who held Jacob's heart, still awaited the fulfillment of also being called a wife. Peace between them was impossible. Laban kept his word. After the days of celebration had passed, he also gave Rachel to Jacob, demanding, however, another 7 years of service. And Jacob, though weary, did not hesitate. His love for Rachel was so great that he accepted the burden without complaint. Yet within the home, rivalry was already beginning to grow. How could 2 sisters share the same husband without the sting of jealousy consuming their hearts? Jacob loved Rachel deeply. His eyes, his words, his gestures all revealed where his heart belonged. Leah saw it clearly. Every time she lay beside Jacob, she knew she was not chosen. Her presence in his bed was tied to her father's scheme, not to the desire of her husband. That sense of rejection pressed upon her soul like a stone. Leah could not compete with her sister's beauty, nor with the love Jacob openly showed to her. But God, who sees the heart, turned his gaze toward Leah. The Lord opened her womb, and she began to bear children. The birth of each child was for her a cry of hope. Now surely my husband will love me, she thought, as she held her firstborn in her arms. Reuben was the first, followed by Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Each name chosen carried her longing and expectation of winning Jacob's affection. Yet, despite it all, his love remained fixed on Rachel. Rachel, on the other hand, suffered in a different way. Though she was loved, her womb remained closed. Every time she saw Leah nursing a child, her heart filled with bitterness. Jacob's affection was not enough to silence the frustration she felt. Inwardly, the joy of being beautiful and preferred turned into hidden tears. She longed to be a mother, but the prolonged waiting became unbearable. The rivalry between the sisters grew like a shadow within the home. Leah, wounded for not being loved, sought value in the children she bore. Rachel, wounded for not bearing children, sought comfort in Jacob's love. Both carried different pains, yet equally heavy. The household became a stage for comparisons, disputes, and whispered resentments. In the midst of this atmosphere, desperate decisions began to appear. Rachel, overcome by the anguish of her barrenness, gave her maid Bilhah to Jacob so that, through her, she might have children. Leah, seeing this, also gave her maid Zilpah to her husband. And so, the competition for love and honor resulted in more children, but not in more peace. Each birth was celebrated with joy and at the same time used as ammunition in a silent war between the two sisters. Jacob, caught between them, felt the weight of a divided home. His heart belonged to Rachel, but his life was marked by Leah's constant presence. The love he wished to live in simplicity was entangled in tears, jealousy, and frustrations. Polygamy, the fruit of that first deception, revealed its painful consequences. Even so, God did not turn away from that family. In the midst of human failings, the Lord continued to fulfill his plans. The children born, each with their own story and meaning, would become the tribes that would form the people of Israel. From the line of Judah, Leah's fourth son would come, the promised Messiah. It was proof that even through pain and rivalry, God was directing his eternal plan. Leah, though rejected, was honored by the Lord. Rachel, though barren for many years, would not be forgotten. Time would reveal that her waiting would bring forth Joseph, the son who would change her family's destiny. Jacob's home, marked by tears and disputes, became a mirror of the human condition. Wounded hearts, wrong choices, yet a God who transforms pain into promise. And so, between Leah's tears and Rachel's anguished waiting, the story moved forward. What no one could imagine was that even in the midst of rivalry, God was building the foundation of the nation that would bear his name. But how would Rachel endure the weight of her waiting? How long could she watch her sister bear children while her own womb remained closed? The years passed, and Jacob's household remained divided between tears and rivalries. Leah continued to bear children, and each new birth felt like a cruel reminder to Rachel of her own barrenness. Jacob's love for her was unquestionable, yet her heart was consumed by the desire to be a mother. Being the favored one was not enough. There was an emptiness in her soul that not even her husband's affection could fill in a moment of despair. Rachel opened her heart to Jacob. "Give me children, or I shall die." Her words revealed the depth of her pain. Jacob, distressed, replied firmly, "Am I in the place of God? Who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" His answer was harsh, yet true. Only the Lord could intervene in such a matter. Still, Rachel did not give up. In an attempt to ease her shame, she gave her maid, Bilhah, to Jacob. Through her, Dan and Naphtali were born, children Rachel considered her own. Though they did not erase the sorrow of her closed womb, Leah, seeing the rivalry grow, also gave her maid, Zilpah, to Jacob, who bore Gad and Asher. The contest continued, each sister striving to outdo the other, as though motherhood were a trophy to be claimed. It was a vivid picture of the consequences of the original deception, a home marked by comparisons, rivalries, and tears. Yet amid all this tension, God did not forget Rachel. In his time, the Lord turned his attention to her and heard her cry. After years of waiting and humiliation, Rachel finally conceived. The birth of her son was accompanied by tears of joy and gratitude. She named him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." For Rachel, Joseph was not just a child. He was the sign that God had heard her prayers and turned her sorrow into hope when Jacob held Joseph in his arms. He saw not only a beloved son, but also the confirmation that the Lord was guiding his life, even through twisted paths. Joseph would later become a powerful instrument in God's hands, but at that moment, he was simply the long-dreamed child, the gift that restored Rachel's smile. The years that followed brought new challenges. Jacob had to contend with Laban's growing wealth and exploitation of his labor. Yet God blessed him in everything, multiplying his flocks and strengthening his position. Still, Rachel's heart longed for more. Her prayer did not cease, and in response, the Lord granted her another son. During the journey back to the Promised Land, in the midst of intense labor pains, Rachel gave birth to Benjamin. But joy was quickly overshadowed by sorrow. Her life slipped away in that moment, and Jacob's beloved wife departed, leaving behind a newborn son and a husband with a shattered heart. Jacob wept bitterly over Rachel's death, even with Benjamin in his arms as consolation. Her absence would mark his story forever. The journey of Jacob, Leah, and Rachel reveals the complexities of human life: love, deception, rivalry, pain, and hope. Leah, the unloved wife, was honored by God with numerous children, including Judah, from whose line the Messiah would come. Rachel, the beloved one, experienced the agony of waiting, but also the joy of giving birth to Joseph and Benjamin, who would become pivotal in God's plan. Jacob, the man who deceived and was deceived, learned to rely on the grace of the Lord, recognizing that his own schemes could never replace God's work. This story calls us to reflect. How often do we also try to hasten God's plans by our own means? How often does the pain of waiting push us toward shortcuts that only bring more sorrow? Yet, just as with Jacob, Rachel, and Leah, the Lord continues to work. Even amid our mistakes and the consequences of our choices, in the end, it was not deception, rivalry, or pain that prevailed, but God's divine purpose. He transformed a family marked by conflict into the cradle of a nation. And from the womb of despised Leah came Judah, from whose line the Savior of the world would be born. Thus, we learn that God's plans always come to pass, even when the path seems crooked. He writes straight, even on lines that human hands have bent. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video. Share it with friends and family so they too may be blessed. The story of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah is not just an ancient account. It is a mirror of human life where we see passionate loves, painful rivalries, waits that seem endless, and deceptions that leave deep scars. Jacob deceived his father and brother, and in the end, he himself was deceived by Laban. Leah was used in a cunning scheme, becoming a wife without being chosen. Rachel, though loved, carried for years the heavy burden of barrenness. 3 lives marked by tears and conflicts, but also 3 lives visited by the grace of God. Leah discovered that even though she was not the preferred one, the Lord saw her, tears, and honored her with children who would form an essential part of the tribes of Israel. Rachel learned that waiting may be long, but it is not eternal. God heard her prayers and gave her Joseph and Benjamin, sons who would change the course of the family story. Jacob, the deceiver turned patriarch, understood that he could not live relying on his own schemes, but had to depend entirely on the promise of the Lord. And what do we learn from this story? We learn that life does not always unfold as we plan. There are deceptions we suffer and pains we bear without deserving. There are moments when we feel rejected, like Leah, or frustrated, like Rachel. But there are also moments when we need to recognize that God continues to write our story, even when it seems everything is out of control. He sees our tears, knows our longings, and fulfills His plans at the perfect time. Perhaps today you are living Rachel's waiting, Leah's rejection, or Jacob's confusion. But remember, the same God who turned that household marked by rivalry into the cradle of the nation of Israel can also transform your life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because many more powerful Bible stories are coming to strengthen your faith and prepare you to trust even more in God's purposes. In the end, the story of Jacob, Rachel, and Leah reminds us that despite human failings, the Lord always fulfills His promises. He is the God who turns deception into learning, tears into hope, and pain into eternal purpose. God bless you, and see you in the next video.